Welcome to Lesson 4A of Dark Hole Elementary, Hardleg Gaming's beginner guide on how to play the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. I'm Hardleg Joe, and in this lesson I'll be talking about the extra deck, the various monsters that are placed in it, and how to summon these monsters. Now that you have an understanding of how to read and summon most monster cards, it's time to explain your extra deck. The extra deck is a smaller deck specifically for certain subtypes of monsters with unique summoning conditions. You do not draw out of your extra deck. Instead, you are free to look through its contents and, when the conditions are right, choose a monster to summon from it. Extra decks are highly specialized and their contents depend greatly on what kind of deck you have. You may start with a maximum of 15 cards in your extra deck, have as few as 1, or elect not to have an extra deck at all. Currently, there are 3 subtypes of monsters which start exclusively in the extra deck. These cards can never be placed in your main deck or your hand by any means. If an effect says to send these monsters back to the hand or deck, they are instead sent back to the extra deck. Summoning monsters from your extra deck is always considered a special summon, so you can summon as many times as you can, and these monsters can only be summoned face up, though you can pick either attack or defense position. Aside from those unique points, these monsters function just like every other type of monster. They can battle, be destroyed, sent to the graveyard, flip face down, banished, etc. The original extra deck cards are fusion monsters. In fact, some older cards may refer to the extra deck as the fusion deck, since that spot was once used exclusively for them. Fusion monster cards are purple colored and have fusion listed as their secondary type. Underneath their type, at the top of their text box, most fusion monsters list the name of 2 other monsters. These monsters are called fusion material, and you must have them either on your hand or on your side of the field in order to conduct a fusion summon. Originally, in order to fusion summon, you had to play the spell card Polymerization. This spell's effect allows you to summon a fusion monster from your extra deck by sending its fusion material from your hand or side of the field to the graveyard. Assuming that Polymerization isn't negated, then applying its effect completes the fusion summon. Over the years, however, new ways to fusion summon have been added. While you may still use Polymerization in most cases, there now exist a multitude of other spell traps which work in place of it. In addition, there are some fusion monsters that don't require a spell trap at all, and simply let you fusion summon them by having the materials on the field. This lesson would be far too long if I covered all the variants of fusion summoning, so for now, the best advice I can give is to read fusion cards very carefully. The second type of extra deck monsters introduced were Syncro Monsters. These cards are white and have the Synchro subtype. Just as fusion monsters require fusion material to summon, Syncro Monsters require synchro material to summon. Unlike fusion material, however, which is usually 2 specific monsters, synchros are more generic, allowing for many possible combinations. In addition, synchro summoning requires no spell card to perform. It is just a game mechanic that you can activate if the conditions are right. In order to synchro summon, you must first have both a tuner monster and 1 or more non-tuner monsters on your side of the field. A tuner is a subtype of monster whose function is to enable synchro summoning. Aside from the word tuner as their subtype, they look and act exactly the same as normal or effect monsters, having no specific color associated with them. Once you have a tuner and a non-tuner face up on your side of the field, look at their levels. If their combined levels are exactly equal to the level of a synchro monster in your extra deck, then you may be able to summon that monster. Before you summon though, be sure to check the text on your synchro monster. Many synchros have the word 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters written at the top of their text box. If this is the case, then you may use any tuner and any non-tuner to summon them, as long as their levels match up. Some synchros, however, require more specific material, or more than 2 materials, so make sure to read this text carefully before you summon. Assuming your synchro material matches your synchro monster, then you may synchro summon. To do this, declare on your turn that you are synchro summoning, and what level monster you're summoning. After counting to make sure your monster's levels match up, send the synchro material to the graveyard, and then special summon the synchro monster you want from the extra deck. The third subtype of extra deck monsters are Xyz monsters. These cards are black, have the subtype XYZ, and don't have a level like other monsters do. Instead, Xyz monsters have a rank, which is displayed in the same place as a level, but the stars are aligned to the left instead of the right, and are circled in black instead of red. Take note of this, as any card which affects a monster's level will not work on an Xyz monster. Just like the previous 2 examples, Xyz monsters require material. In this case, it's called Xyz material. Xyz material is the most generic of all the materials, and in most cases can be any two monsters whose levels are the same as the Xyz monster's rank. So for example, a rank 4 Xyz monster will need two level 4 monsters as material. Some Xyz monsters require specific kinds of material, and some will require more than 2 material. Just like with synchros, be sure to read the top of the text box, as the exact material needed will be written there. Also like synchro summoning, Xyz summoning is an innate game mechanic and requires no spell card to perform. The actual act of Xyz summoning is a little different than synchro or fusion summoning. When you Xyz summon, you place the material monsters on top of each other in one monster card zone. Doing this is called an overlay on Dueling Network. Then, place the Xyz monster you wish to summon on top of the material. Once the Xyz monster is summoned, its materials cease to be monsters. They lose their effect, cannot battle, and no longer count as being on the field. Instead, they are referred to solely as Xyz material. They become attached to the monster, and if the monster is removed from the field, then all of its material go to the graveyard. Many Xyz monsters have effects that require you to detach Xyz material in order to use them. Detaching Xyz material means to select one of the materials attached to the monster and send it to the graveyard. When an Xyz monster no longer has any material attached to it, then it cannot activate an effect that requires it to detach. Finally, we have the outlier of the extra deck cards, Pendulum Monsters. Unlike all the previous examples, Pendulum Monsters don't start in the extra deck. Instead, they act like normal or effect monsters. They're placed in the main deck, and if you draw them, then you can summon or set them on the field in all the same ways that you would a normal monster. The reason they're mentioned in this lesson is that unlike every other type of monster, if a Pendulum Monster would be sent from the field to the graveyard, they are instead sent face up to the extra deck. Once there, they can be pendulum summoned back onto the field. Before we get to pendulum summoning, however, I need to explain more about Pendulum Monsters and the Pendulum Zones. Pendulum Monsters blur the line between monster and spell, and their card color reflects that, changing from orange or yellow at the top to spell card green at the bottom. Because of this dual nature, Pendulum Monsters have two text boxes. The bottom box contains the card's monster effect, or its flavor text if it has no effect. This box is used when the card is played as a monster. The upper box is the card's pendulum effect, which is used when the card is played like a spell. Playing a Pendulum Monster as a spell is similar to playing a continuous spell, except that instead of placing it in your spell trap zones, you may only place Pendulum Monsters in one of the two designated Pendulum Zones. From there, the rules are the same as playing a spell. You announce which monster you're playing, place it face up in an open Pendulum Zone, and assuming it isn't negated, you can activate its pendulum effects. Playing the card this way makes it officially a spell card, meaning it can only be negated, destroyed, or targeted by effects that work on spell cards, and not by effects that work on monsters. In addition, while in a Pendulum Zone, the card can no longer attack, be attacked, or use its monster effect. The top text box also contains the monster's pendulum scales, which are the two numbers on either side of the pendulum effect. This scale is the key to pendulum summoning. In order to perform a pendulum summon, you must first have a monster in both of your pendulum zones, which have different pendulum scale numbers. Performing a pendulum summon is very different from an Xyz or a synchro summon. Instead of summoning one particular monster, you can instead choose as many different monsters as you'd like and summon them at the same time. When you do this, not only can you summon pendulum monsters from your extra deck, but also any normal, effect, and other pendulum monsters from your hand as well. The only restriction on pendulum summoning is that the monsters you choose must be of a certain level, which is dictated by the pendulum scales. To know which monsters you can summon, look at the scale numbers that face inwards towards the center of the field. When you pendulum summon, you can only choose monsters whose levels are between those two numbers. For example, if the scale numbers are 1 and 8, then you may summon any normal effect or pendulum monsters with a level between 2 and 7. If the scales are 3 and 5, then you may only special summon monsters that are level 4, and if the scales are the same, or only one number apart, then you may not pendulum summon at all. Once you have both your scales in place, then you can pendulum summon once per turn. To do this, declare that you are pendulum summoning, and then declare how many monsters you plan to summon. You can choose all the monsters you want to summon first, and then special summon them at the field at the same time. Like with all summonings, your opponent has a chance to respond, but it's particularly important to note with Pendulum Monsters, because when you summon a Pendulum Monster and it's negated, it is sent to the graveyard instead of going back to the extra deck. Similarly, if you try to play a Pendulum Monster as a spell and it gets negated, it'll also go to the graveyard. Well, that's it for this lesson of Darkhole Elementary. Now that you understand most of the cards you're ever likely to see, move on to Lesson 5, where I'll be talking about how to move through your turn.